It's a huge American paradox, right? This country was literally born from a tax revolt. And yet here we are trying to figure out one of the most complicated tax systems in the world. So, how do we get from don't tread on me to the 1040 form? Well, let's get into it.
Okay, so here's how we're going to break it all down. First, we'll jump right into the revolution itself. Then, we'll look at this amazing period, a whole century with basically no income tax. After that, we'll hit the big one, the moment in 1913 when everything shifted. From there, we'll try to make sense of the tangled web we're all stuck in today. And finally, we're going to peek into the future and see what might be next for your taxes.
All right, let's start at the very beginning. Now, we've all been taught that the American Revolution was all about crazy high taxes, right? But the truth, well, it's a little more interesting than that. It wasn't just about the money. It was about who held the power. Yeah, this phrase is everywhere. No taxation without representation. But what does that really mean? See, the colonists' biggest issue wasn't that the taxes were sky high. In fact, a lot of times, they were paying less than people back in England. The real problem, the thing that drove them crazy, was who was doing the taxing. They had absolutely no say, no vote, nothing, while a parliament thousands of miles across the ocean was making all the decisions about their wallets. And you can see how things just spiraled out of control. So Britain is basically broke after the French and Indian War, and they start looking at the colonies like a giant ATM. First, they hit them with the Stamp Act in '65. This was a huge deal because it was the first direct tax. You saw it, you felt it, on legal papers, even on playing cards. It set a really bad precedent. Then, get this, the Tea Act comes along, and it wasn't even a new tax. It was basically a corporate bailout for a failing tea company, but the colonists saw right through it. They knew it was a trick to get them to just accept that Britain could tax them whenever they wanted, and that was the final straw. So, they win the revolution. You'd figure the first thing this new country does is set up some big, fancy tax system, right? Nope. For over 100 years, the US government managed to run itself completely with the one thing we all take for granted today, a federal income tax. Hard to even imagine. So how on earth did they pull that off? Well, the federal government back then was super lean. It really only had three main ways to make money. The biggest one? Tariffs. Just a tax on stuff coming into the country. Number two was excise taxes, or what we call sin taxes today, on things like whiskey and tobacco. And the third was just selling off all that massive land out west. That's it. A pretty straightforward system, really. But there is a little footnote to this whole story. The income tax did make a brief appearance. It was Abraham Lincoln, actually, who brought in the very first one. He needed money to fund the Union Army during the Civil War. But, and this is the key part, it was always meant to be a temporary thing. And sure enough, in 1872, it was gone. The country just went right back to how things were before. But that wasn't gonna last forever. We're about to hit the single biggest turning point in this entire story. This is the moment, the exact moment, that our modern tax world was born. We're talking about the year in 1913, a single amendment to the Constitution, and it changed absolutely everything. I mean, just look at the difference here. The old way of doing things was all about trade and selling land. But as America started to become a real-world power, the government realized it needed something more. Something stable, predictable, and frankly, a lot bigger. The answer they came up with? Going straight to the source, people's paychecks. And this right here is what made it all legal, the 16th Amendment. It gave Congress the power to levy an income tax on every single person, no matter what state they were in, and, crucially, it made that power permanent. They'd actually tried this before, back in 1894, but the Supreme Court shot it down. This time, though, the amendment made it official. This was the birth of the tax system we know today. Which, of course, brings us to today. And man, what started as a pretty simple idea, well, it's ballooned into this unbelievably complex web of rules, forms, deductions, and credits that gets its tentacles into just about every dollar we earn, spend, or save. I mean, just think about what some people call the double or even triple dip. You get taxed on the money you earn, that's your income tax. Then you get hit with payroll taxes, Social Security, Medicare, before you even get your hands on the cash. Then you go spend what's left, and boom, sales tax. If you own a home, you're paying property tax. And if you're lucky enough for your investments to grow, guess what? Capital gains tax. It's just layer after layer, and it makes it almost impossible for anyone to figure out what their real tax rate actually is. And this quote really hits home for a lot of people. The idea that paying property tax feels like renting your own home from the government. Because it never stops, right? It can feel like you don't really truly own your property. You're just paying the government an annual fee to let you stay there. And here's the thing, this massive complexity isn't just annoying for us, it's a huge business for others. I'm talking about a multi-billion-dollar industry built around just helping us comply with the tax code. The entire existence of these huge tax prep companies is based on one simple fact. Our tax code is just way too complicated for most people to handle on their own. And this is the core reason that whole industry even exists. The US has this system called self-assessment, which is actually pretty rare among other big countries. It means the burden is on you to figure it all out, do all the math, and file everything correctly. And if you screw it up, you're the one who pays the price. A system like that almost forces you to get help. So all this frustration and complexity, it's leading to a really big debate about the future, especially with some big tax changes set to expire around 2026. People are asking, is the whole system just broken? And if it is, what do we replace it with? Right now, there are two really big ideas on the table for getting rid of the income tax completely. The first one is to kind of go back in time and fund the government with huge tariffs on stuff we import. The second idea is called the fair tax, and it's a plan to just scrap all federal taxes and replace them with a single national sales tax. Now, the fair tax idea sounds pretty good on the surface, right? No more IRS, no more filing your taxes every year. You only pay tax when you buy something new. But there are some pretty big downsides people point to. The main one is that it could really hurt lower and middle income folks, since they have to spend most of their money just to live. And that tax rate? To bring in the same amount of money the government gets now, it would have to be really, really high. We're talking somewhere in the 23 to 30% range. But there's a whole other camp in this debate. They say, hang on, maybe the problem isn't how we tax, but how we spend. And you can see why. We're paying record high taxes, but you look around and see roads that are falling apart, public services that feel like they're from another era, and you have to ask, where is all that money actually going? And this is just staggering. Take a look at this. The amount of money we spend just paying the interest on the national debt is now almost as much as we spend on our entire military. Think about that. That's a huge chunk of our tax dollars that isn't building anything or providing any services. It's just servicing old debt. So instead of just blowing up the whole tax system, some reformers are focused on making it smarter and more efficient. They're talking about things like sunset clauses, which would basically force government programs to prove they're still working or they just disappear, or return-free filing. This is something lots of countries already do, where the government, who has all your info anyway, just sends you a pre-filled bill. No more tax software. And another idea is localism, just pushing more of the taxing and spending decisions down to the state and city level so people can have more say in where their money goes. Which really leaves us with the big question as we look forward. What's the real problem here? Is it how we're taxed, or is it how our tax money is spent? The answer we choose is going to define the next chapter of this country's very long, very complicated story with taxes.